Welcome back to Rocker's Beer Review. Today we're going to review the new album by Pineapple Thief called It Leads to This. You know, at one time, Pineapple Thief used to be my favourite band. From their most sort of progressive release of Variations of a Dream that came out way back in 2003, through to the next album, 10 Stories Down in 2005, and then Little Man in 2006. Their albums could go from a more indie rock version of Porcupine Tree to a more progressive version of Coldplay. They sort of sit in between those two bands, really. They could have been, at one time, one of the top progressive bands in the 2000s. But somehow they never broke through with the sort of next 5 albums after Little Man. Although having the odd, interesting, to some extent, great song, they all started to sound a little bit samey and a less progressive, and very difficult to identify one album over the other in terms of the style, with comparing to each release that they did. Then in 2016, they announced that the Porcupine Tree drummer, Gavin Harrison, would be drumming on their next album, Your Wilderness. And the hope, certainly from me, is that one of the top drummers, not only in the UK, but actually in the world, would kickstart them back into the Air successors to Porcupine Tree, especially now that Steven Wilson at this time had put Porcupine Tree on hold and was concentrating on his solo albums. And although when At the Wilderness came out, it was a very good album, and certainly definitely the best release that they'd offered for 10 years. The following albums, Disillusion and Versions of the Truth, now with Gavin confirmed as not only a permanent member of the band, but also a songwriting contributor, these albums fell a little bit flat, and they didn't sort of drag them kicking and screaming into the hearts and minds of the modern prog rock fan. So, this brings us to their latest album, It Leads to This. Now, this was released back in February, the 9th of February 2024, so just last month from recording this video. And musically, the album still showcases Gavin Harrison's tight, almost percussion-heavy drumming. But the songwriting is much better this time. It's more focused, both lyrically and musically. There's less emphasis of being the reserved indie prog to something a bit more dynamic and therefore a bit more interesting. It's far from heavy, but the guitars have a little more bite to them, and where before that the sort of instrumental passages were a little bit sort of dull, again, more emphasis on this, and there's more sort of structure breaking than the free of the sort of indie prog genre, more than anything they've done over the past. So it's pushing out of this sort of indie pop into indie prog, I should say, into something a bit more heavier, a bit more metallic, dare I say, and this is only a good thing. So let's go through the songs on the album. Things kick off with Put It Right, which starts slowly before the drums come in and push the track forward. Some great sort of harmony vocals, but it's a very piano-driven sort of song, but it slowly builds, and then from the sort of 2-minute mark onwards, it's sort of, you get this great distorted guitar coming in, and there's a lot more, but there's also a lot more space on this track. It reminds me of what bands like Talk Talk were doing in the sort of late 80s, in the later parts of their albums, where they were trying to get that much more space in between the instruments. And this is what I think Pineapple Thief are doing much more, or certainly on this song. And this song's a great opener, and it's a good tease to what's to come later on. And track 2 comes soaring out of the tracks. It's a much heavier song, much more guitar orientated and more substance. There's a really sort of catchy sing-along melody and chorus, of course. And it's probably at this point my favourite track from the album. There's more layered guitars and a driving drum beat, and it's really catchy as hell. Some great little sort of drum-led instrumental sections. Track 3 then is the title track, It starts slow with Bruce Ford's melancholy sort of dripping with emotion. It's very much the same sort of vocal style that he's been using for a number of years. This song starts to get a little bit heavier, and again it ends with a really interesting sort of progressive guitar interlude. It just keeps the track much more interesting, and you want to go back and listen to it again and find new parts to it. Track 4, The Frost, is a slow, brooding, heavier song. Again, much more guitar orientated with some great layered vocals. It's got a real strong rock groove, and it's, in my opinion, another really great track, a much more immediate track than maybe some of the others. All That's Left then brings everything that Pineapple Thief have in their locker. It starts with a relaxing sort of slow groove. It's almost sounding like Gavin has got his steel drums out here. He's got a little bit of calypso into the sound, but then it suddenly it bursts with an explosive sort of guitar halfway through, and again, it's probably showing them at their most heaviest in parts, and certainly some of their more aggressive sounding. It's another really good track. Now It's Yours then opens with keyboard samples. It sounds like the sort of effects that you would expect someone like Steven Wilson to be all over. It sounds a bit like a song from, maybe they're like a couple of these last albums. But after the effects, it sort of breaks into a sort of a piano-led, almost like a semi-ballad. And at 6 minutes long, it's probably it is the longest song on the album, although you hardly would call it a prog epic. Although it does start to rock out at the end again with some nice interplay between the guitars and the drums and bass. Before you get this big sort of guitar refrain, where it really elevates the song up and culminates in a sort of a slow but brooding end. It's probably the grower on the album, I think. The next track is the penultimate song, Every Trace of Me. It sounds like classic Pineapple Thief. Some nice sort of prominent bass lines by John Sykes. No, not that John Sykes. And some great drumming by Gavin. And there's again more searing guitar. It does seem like the guitar is getting more and more emphasis as the album goes on. And it's some really nice use of that lead guitar sound. Finally, the last song, To Forget. It starts with some acoustic guitar, which it's quite rare, but this is probably the first time we've heard an acoustic guitar on this album. They are known for using quite a lot of acoustic guitar on their previous albums, but this song sort of, I suppose, sums up a lot of the previous tracks. It's almost like a best of all those tracks. We've got the slow and heavy sections. We've got some really sort of big out of the blue even sort of lead guitar section, and it's always driven along some really great drumming. There's lots of nice little instrumental parts in this again, and again there's more space in this song. There's more, it reminds me more of sort of tracks from Colour of Spring by Talk Talk. So that's the album. It's only 8 songs, it's only 40 minutes. I think though that this is Pineapple Thief's best album since Your Wilderness, and I think it's a great return of form. I'm really interested to see, where they take this next. Okay, it is a short album at 40 minutes, but then that means there's no excess fat really, with all the 8 songs being good ones. I mean, it could do with some longer epic-like tracks, like The Final Thing on My Mind from Your Wilderness, or even White Mist from Disillusion. They were really good epic sort of 10-minute-ish sort of songs. The only other thing missing though from this album is I think it needs more of that heaviness. Even though there's some elements of heaviness in there, it needs to be a bit more heavier. It needs to be a bit more progressive. And some of the playing and some of the parts just need to sort of, just let rip a little bit more. Sometimes they can be a little bit contained, a little bit reserved. And some of the tracks you feel are maybe a little bit too edited. And I think what could really elevate this album to greatness is that maybe some of these tracks would, if they were expanded out a little bit more, extended a little bit more, and maybe when they play them live, they'll do that. So we shall see how these songs come across live. But let me know what you think of this album, and if you're a fan of the band, then let me know what your favourite albums are, and where do you find this album ranking within their sort of quite comprehensive back catalogue. Let me know in the comments. I hope you've enjoyed this review for the latest album by Pineapple Thief, and until the next one, you know what you do, keep on rocking.